to start, I'm sure a bunch of people will. So, well, Debbie and Lynn have already told me they have, and there's somebody over here. So I'm going to start with Debbie.
Yeah, sorry, Lynn. I promise I won't be long. Yeah, I actually thinking about the relationship between popular misogyny and fascism, and something that Sara, you said about it's nothing new, that this is all part that colonialism always had a thing is feeding back like mad. No, it doesn't normally. Okay. Move over. No, I'll stand up, sorry. Back where I should be. Yeah, it's the relationship between this, that somehow, when Sara said something about the fact that femo-nationalism had always been an element of colonialism, it reminded me of, some of you may know this, a guy called Klaus Tuerleit wrote a book called Male Fantasies, it's published in the early 1980s, and he did make that link between misogyny and the rise of fascism in Germany before the Second World War. So I just kind of, wondered if either of you would like to comment on that.
Well, one thing I will say is that I think that when the extreme right or neo-fascism is talked about in the media as a global phenomenon, that often misogyny is kind of and we were just talking about this earlier today, misogyny is seen as like sort of a gateway to the alt-right or to extreme right, and I actually think that is not right. I think that misogyny is not a tactic, it is not a mechanism, it is a vision for the future in terms of these kind of neo-fascist extreme right movements. And I think that's what that book was also saying about Germany, in fascism and masculinity, or in masculinity, a certain kind of masculinities at that time. And so I think that, it's like misogyny is often like explained as sort of an outlier or an enclosure or something, the Trump's locker room, right? And I think that what we need to actually more and more acknowledge is that it is not a tactic, it is an agenda.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's not only an agenda, but it is part of a masculine subjectivity, and I think that's part of what Tuerleit was saying. That I haven't read it for years, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. The masculine subjectivity under capitalism, under particular, and he was talking about Germany at a very particular time in its history. There is this potential that misogyny emerges as fascism. Yeah. Sara, did you want to?
Well, I don't know this book specifically, but it reminds me of George Mosse, who's also the historian, who talks about masculinity in Germany specifically, masculinity and the relationship between masculinity and nationalism. So I don't know what's not knowing this book, I don't know what's the relationship that he makes between the rise of fascism and specifically the strengthening of misogyny. And I wouldn't say which one comes first or if there is, the causal relationship, but certainly the two things are, absolutely related. I don't think there is any doubt about that.
I'm going to let Lynn come here now. Come on, Lynn.
Oh, well, you've got the microphone.
Come here then.
Really, I wasn't going to say so much, but I was just going to say something about each paper. So I was thinking of the shift from 70s feminism to populist feminism today, and thinking that a number of the slogans and songs and so on, you could see as vaguely connected to the present, such as Helen Reddy singing I am woman, hear me roar, or I want to be an engineer. There were all sorts of songs about empowering women, but they were all absolutely from the grassroots. The idea of them being on the charts, let alone MTV video. It is like unthinkable, because actually the context was a very anti-consumerist context. You know, we were not only not wanting to... Can they be stopped at the end there? Can you say less? Can you be more quiet at the end? Ooh. we not only wanted to keep men quiet and and not to dress or perform for men, like there was another very popular song, the Custom-Made Woman Blues, you know, that, you know, I tried to please men all the time and I'm not going to be doing that anymore. And our T-shirts were almost always got at Jumbles sales. That's where it's our favourite place to buy things. You know, there was this really strong anti-market or anti-capitalist, as well as, you know, that was a way of sense of autonomy we had, was an autonomy from the market, from the way in which our bodies and ourselves had been used. And so in the T-shirts we made would have things like a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle, or don't do it, die. I mean, you know, these were about empowering women, but, you know, there was a lot of humour, but the main thing is they were so clearly coming from a different place to now. So I just wanted to make that point. And in terms of your contribution, which, you know, I remember so well, you know, being amazed as the right, you know, Bush, etc., start to ridiculously use feminism for their militaristic plans and so on, at the same time as in every way undermining women. And I also remember then, if we turn from the conservatives to feminism itself, debates from, say, Elizabeth Badinter in France, opposing the veil. In Britain, I'm actually not aware of much, and that might be my ignorance. So I'm not aware of anything or people speaking in the name of feminism. I'm much more aware of, you know, feminists working around Yarl's Wood for migrant women, and going over to Calais and supporting the refugee children. So I can't quite, but I'm still thinking, I think, about a left feminism, and I'm not sure, although it may well be that there is this other, more conservative feminism, but it seems so detached, you know, like May did start women to win and so on, but so there is a neoliberal feminism, but it's harder here, I think, to link it, or I find it harder to link to an activist feminism here. So, you know, the global women's strike and so on, which is one of the main activist feminists, are absolutely pro-migrant and so on. But, you know, there could be a category that I'm not seeing, I don't know. So that was what I was going to say.
Thanks. Thanks, Lynn. I mean, the one thing that did happen here, I mean, the EDL, the English Defence League, when it started, you know, it used the language of feminationalism. I mean, it presented itself as anti-Islamic, and it presented itself as defending liberal values. So they did try to do that. They tried to, and they recruited, and, you know, they recruited kind of Sikh and sort of Sikh nationalists as part of their project. So that was a kind of British manifestation, but it wasn't.
I didn't say there wasn't conservative.
No, you're not. I'm just saying. Yeah.
Just to address your point, Lynn, about the kind of the sort of 70s feminism and the anti-consumerist kind of move, and the way in which anti-consumerism was part of you know, different parts of feminist movements in the 1970s. I think what is different, aside from other things, about the current moment is also what Catherine Rottenberg puts really beautifully in her book, and is that neoliberal feminism, unlike even liberal feminism, which has plenty of limitations, doesn't critique neoliberalism. It embraces it, right? So liberal feminism, at least there was a critique, imminent or otherwise, right, that was about gaps in liberalism that left out women. Neoliberal feminism embraces it. So it by almost necessity is a commodity feminism, right? Because, or a consumerist feminism, because it embraces the consumer as a key agent in the landscape. Anyway.
Okay, thanks. Did you want to add anything?
Just very briefly to say, I think you're right, Lynn, when it comes to feminists in these countries. I mean, at least you can't really, I can't think of examples at the moment of prominent, well-known feminists endorsing these ideas against Muslim women. There are feminists, and there are also some feminist organizations who are, against the veil. They think that the veil is a symbol of women's oppression, but there is nothing comparable to what's going on in France or Italy or the Netherlands.
Okay, thanks. So there's do you want to come up and... We can stretch it almost all the way over there. Just come here.
Yeah, I'll take the chair. That's good. Hi, my name is Chiara. Thanks very much for your interventions. I just had a few comments that are not really questions, but could be turned into questions, but I'll try to be brief. So, the first one is about what does feminism as a project of social change has to offer to men, which I think you raised. And I think, for me, with Me Too, I think that we've really seen how, basically women are still being dehumanized. I think there was an output of very difficult experiences that were shared. And, that has quickly turned into, we can do anything now, or that kind of stuff. And I think that, it would have been great to see all these feminist allies that apparently we have in cis men stand up and do some more work in educating their fellow men, but this has really not happened, I don't think, unless, not in a visible way. So I think there's still so much work to do for men to kind of do that empowerment, to understand how patriarchy is kind of damaging them as well, and what does holding power mean, because I think that this idea that something has been taken away is because there was too much power. So feminism requires rebalancing power anyways. And then I wanted to ask you, Sara, a question. Sarah. I think that, from my perspective, so I work on women's rights at Amnesty, and I do a lot of global campaigning, etc. I think I'm really interested in the ways in which recently popular culture has become a gateway to politicizing individuals. So, for example, the Handmaid's Tale show. If you see how much that has fired up people who had perhaps less interest in feminism or a passive interest, and then the costume itself has become the symbol of protest around the world, and now when you see that, or a group of women dressed like that, you know what's going on. I think that's really interesting, because I agree with you on on what you basically said, and I think that now we're at the extreme, of course Ivanka Trump is a feminist and whatever, but I think there are also interesting ways in which popular culture and kind of let's say consumerism-led stuff then brings people into more politicized space around body politics and body positivity and stuff like that. And then I wanted just to say that actually last week Tommy Robinson said that if he's going to be elected as an MEP, he's going to donate his salary to women's organization and violence against women sector to fight against grooming and child sexual exploitation. To which the whole sector immediately replied with a letter saying, no, stay away from us, and So this is happening also in the UK, even though it's in different ways. And then I wanted to ask you both whether in your analysis you have looked from an intersectional kind of queer perspective, because I think one of the main issues that we're seeing in feminism here in the UK is that some prominent feminists are attacking trans people, and I think that, like, because I'm also from Italy, in the context of Italy, that's quite clear to understand, because of course anyone who is not straight is a threat to the family, which is the project that they're trying to kind of reproduce. But I think in this context it's quite different, because there's not an immediate kind of visible link between trans exclusionary feminists and these far-right subjects, although there are some kind of accounts emerging of funding coming from evangelical US Christians to them. So, yeah, sorry, it was long, but it gave me a lot to think about.
Well, I'll try to just say two quick things. One about popular culture being sort of a gateway to thinking. I absolutely agree, and I think that one of the things that we need to use your example about The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale was published by Margaret Atwood in 1985. When she did that, she actually based it on real kind of a context of things like the pandemic of AIDS and nuclear accidents and things that she said in that book, that if she was going to create an imaginary garden, there were going to be real toads in it. And so she wanted to really kind of point that there are these are things that actually have happened. So it wasn't so much speculative fiction or speculative dystopia, but something that recognized a real context. 2017, Hulu streamed the video. I'm sorry, I just gave a talk on The Handmaid's Tale, so that's why I'm like thinking a lot about your question. In 2017, Hulu streamed the series, the first season of the series, and it absolutely, Jerem, your comment about Georgia, that is, I mean, people are saying this is Handmaid's Tale. This is about criminalizing, abortion, and also criminalizing women who have it as in terms of homicide. I mean, it's a absolute reclassification of this practice into a different kind of law. So I do think that The Handmaid's Tale gives us a way to see how these things, how they resonate in popular culture. So I think, yeah, again, Stuart Hall said, the popular is a terrain of struggle, and The Handmaid's Tale can be one of those places. It's not going to be one of those places that we can mobilize struggle if I'm just watching it on my couch streaming on Hulu, right? I mean, so that's the thing is again to take that visibility of these issues and actually kind of extend them in a way that is a mobilizing force rather than something that is more individualized. I was going to say something else, but I'll let Sara talk.
No, please.
Now I'm forgetting what the second question was. That was a pass off to Sara because I forgot what the second question was, and now I have to remember what the second question was. Oh, that's okay. I didn't signal you quite clearly enough. What was your second point?
Yeah, it was just about like Me Too.
Right. I mean, Me Too, I think, there are people in this room have been working on Me Too. Jimmy, you had said earlier about Me Too, whether or not it's a movement or popular feminism as a movement. I think that, again, that moment that you talked about when all those stories were coming out, it was like incredible. It was incredible to read them every single day, to wake up, to have new stories. And Rebecca Traister wrote a piece where she said, just let the stories flood in. Let us be flooded with these stories. And it was incredible. And part of what part of the limitations of popular feminism that I see is that because Me Too, especially in the way that it was a hashtag rather than the 2007 movement that was started by Tarana Burke as an intersectional movement, to get to your point about intersectionality, intersectionality doesn't translate as well on Twitter. It's harder to explain the messiness of intersectionality in 140 characters, and so. But it is, those are the movement that became visible was one that was primarily by white female celebrities, right? And then so that has its limitations in terms of visibility. I will say that almost a year after Weinstein story broke in the New York Times about Me Too, almost exactly a year later, we did start to see a bunch of other stories supplanting the Me Too stories, and also came in as a flood, and those were about the white male victims. Kavanaugh, Trump, Peterson started to dominate those kind of same media platforms, and so so those take over that, and that's part of the nature of the media landscape. When you're talking about digital media and social media, everything circulates so fast. That's circulation becomes more prominent than engagement.
But sorry, I think it would be good to revisit this. Sorry.
Do you want to? Okay. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? Okay. Here you go.
Thank you. Forgive me, I don't know your names, but Sarah and Sara. Okay, that's easy enough. I was really taken by your observation regarding the growth in care work, and how more often than not, because it's low paid, it's low wage, it's just kind of siphoned off to migrant workers. And I think what struck me about that observation was just in conjunction with the ethno-nationalism and the right's obsession with, with restricting access to abortion, and a woman's role is just to churn out beautiful white babies of the nation. And in contrast, a woman's kind of duty in caregiving at the end of life. I think that's just an observation I made. I don't know how I can translate that into a question, but I just thought there was an interesting dichotomy. It's what's the role? And I think largely in Western cultures, death is more taboo than birth. It's if giving birth is a beautiful thing and being pro-life is a beautiful thing, well, if you restrict access to health and education and everything that comes after birth until you end up with death, then what's a woman's role in that capacity? And particularly migrant women, non-white women, marginalised women. I don't know if you have any observations regarding that.
No, that's really interesting. Especially what you say in terms of death being more of a taboo than birth. I'm not sure exactly. I think that's true. In the sense, I think it's generally speaking more difficult to talk about that, I guess. And I guess also when it comes to care for elderly people who are also facing death, I guess there is increasingly an attitude in these neoliberal societies according to which the state doesn't want to engage anymore into providing care facilities or good services. So everything is increasingly privatized, and rich elderly people are given private corporate care facilities in which they can die in a dignified way and so forth. But increasingly, the rubbish care facilities are really for the poor elderly people. So there is this certain attitude, certainly, that we don't care much about elderly care in that sense. There is also a difference. I work on elderly care and child care, and there is definitely a difference also in the way in which these different care services are monitored. So there is there are lots of controls when it comes to childcare facilities and services, obviously because parents are the first to control and, etc. In the case of elderly people, you see much less of that, because very often they are left alone, or, they are there because perhaps their children do not have much time to take care of them, and so they don't see them very often. This is just to say these kind of jobs, taking care of people, and especially people maybe we don't care about much anymore. These societies, obviously not we, don't care about much anymore, are left, are considered low skills and left to the migrants, because someone has to do it. And so, they are, I guess it's an interesting connection for sure. I'm not sure exactly how I'm making sense of that, but yeah.
And I've always understood, sorry to move on? Okay, cheers, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, any further questions? Okay, we got. No. Okay.
I don't want feedback. I want feedback from you, but not from the tech. Okay, there we go. Hey everyone, this is amazing. Thank you so much. This might be a question, but it's going to be a series of images that I'm hearing through this conversation that makes me want to think about consumer culture differently. And that is the 1970s, Lynn, you're talking about, right, Helen Reddy, but also Charlie perfume, right? So the moment where consumer culture emerges with a perfume for women, for emancipated women, right? Which includes one of my favorite ads from that moment for this terrible thing, is that the woman executive is grabbing the guy's butt. Right, so harassment, that's the thing. If women want empowerment, they get to harass. The other one is, and you've talked about this a lot, Sara. So it was brought up about men, sort of cis men working on their own issues around harassment. The Gillette ad that began to precisely talk about what men were doing to train men, and the backlash that happened against that, the misogynistic backlash against Gillette. And then the third one, which I didn't even know about, the Nike ad. So we have a whole series of books right now coming out. Brittany Cooper, Rebecca Traister, some of these others that have rage in the title, right? Women and rage. So for Nike to come around and do that is tapping into something, but I'm wondering if in the last 40 to 50 years, the role of consumer culture, and this is the question that's been brought up throughout tonight, has the role of consumer culture and commoditization changed? Whereas in the past, we used to say, oh, it would stop something, it would neutralize, it would recuperate, it would co-opt. But now it becomes almost like, yeah, they're on it too, right? Like they might even be a gateway to other activists. But there's something else about consumer culture now that isn't the same as what it used to do in the 1970s. So I mean, it's I'm posing it as a question, but only because other people have posed it. But I wanted to give specific examples about it.
What do you think you're doing?
Who? What?
What do you think it's doing?
What do I think it's doing? I think it's trying to catch up. I think that it's trying to attach itself to something that seems socially relevant, because the newest kind of movement in marketing is socially conscious marketing, like Copernic and Nike, right? So it's like tapping into activist sentimentality and movements. But I wonder if this is the thing that actually can't be recuperated in the same way. Is there ever a limit to recuperation? And I think as analysts, we've always said like, well, it just does this, rather than historicize it and say like, yeah, maybe at a certain moment it did, but in a moment of social media where this is being circulated so much, it becomes a resource so that you can wear the t-shirt and you can protest and you can form, or organizations to fight harassment or college campus. Oh, I thought you were grabbing it.
No, I wasn't grabbing.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I guess it's time to go. Okay.
Further.
Okay, I'll just not move from this position. Just very quickly, I think you're right. Ads are trying to catch up. That's not a surprise, actually, because I think they are, that the consumer culture is always trying to catch up to different cultural politics. The ads you gave as an example from the 1970s were also connected to civil rights rhetoric and civil rights movements, and the ways in which those kind of rhetorics were then tied to things like niche markets, right, and that kind of thing. So I think that that's true. I think that it's a paralyzing conversation to say either we have completely sold out or these ads are liberating. And I think that often is the way in which it's framed, and we have to think about it in more in ambivalent terms about what it is that the ads or public awareness, like that Nike ad that you mentioned. I mean, the Nike ad that you mentioned is really interesting because it also uses the word crazy, right? So it's like women talking about how crazy they get during rage or during these moments, and so it is still containing rage in a very particular kind of way.
As well. It's all about, how we are framed and what we are allowed to do is in the same language that men would do it. This is strong, brave, and we are just crazy, right? So crazy.
So they're using it as a critique.
Yeah, it's just parallel.
And it's still.
To me, it's just making that mirror obvious and kind of just allowing things that. I live just accountable, just out there, just worded. Yeah. I had a question.
Okay, sorry, did you want to say anything about it?
I guess
you don't have to, really, it's all right.
No, because I think you're right.
Okay.
I think Sarah responded.
Probably also a mother to boys and to girls, and it's a problem. It's something that on one hand I feel I'm way too wordy at home and back about issues, and when a girl says stop, it's a stop, and so any advice, any tips, any thoughts about the future of generations? Educational advice for the future.
Oh my God, I need that. I need that myself. I don't think I have much educational advice. I am in desperate need for that myself at the moment. I have a 5-year-old who behaves like a 13 years old, so if anyone actually has advice on that, thank you. I'm not sure how to respond to this.
Well, I mean, I think I have 2 daughters, and I was sort of really praying. I remember saying I was really praying to what I was praying, I don't know, that we would have girls, because I don't know what you do with boys like in this conjuncture. And my impression, I have to say, of lots of parents who have boys is they don't know what to do, really. They don't. Well, you do very well, actually, but you're not. You do very well. You can talk about it. You can come tell us, Catherine. What's the advice for boys? Because I'm talking about my localised experience. I'm not trying to generalise from it, but the extent that it seems to me a great deal of work has to be done to talk boys down from the constant interpellation they get that they are privileged and they should enjoy their privilege and they should just have it. There is not a popular feminism for 7-year-old boys, really. There is for girls, and girls get told it in the language of empowerment. But boys have to get it at home. They have to get it hard, and it's hard work, and it's hard, and you need it. And I see I see parents really struggling. So come tell us how it's done.
Sarah can tell us how it's done. Yeah, you can.
I can't tell how it's done, although I do have 2 boys who are grown now, so they're 26 and 23. I think you're right, Jim. I mean, I think that it's a different kind of dynamic. I will say that the only thing I would say is that my boys have said that I've ruined all popular culture for them. So there's that. When I've asked them to think about the representation of gender in The Little Mermaid, that did not go over that well, I will say. But I did teach. The only advice I would say is that in a contemporary moment of things like rape culture and widespread sexual harassment, it's really important for boys to know that what they should be thinking about is just not doing that, rather than what women are doing to protect themselves. So in other words, have some agency about what's happening and make ethical and moral decisions, rather than have this whole culture of rape culture and sexual harassment be focused on what women should do to protect themselves, rather than how addressing the fact that men are the ones who are doing it. So
yeah, I think you're right. This is a question I wanted to ask. I know it's a bit late to ask this quite hard question, but to me, I would say the question I want to ask is let me set it up and frame it. To some extent, it seems to me that the femo-nationalism it's responding to many different conditions, but partly it is simply responding to the very kind of the success globally of a certain kind of liberal feminism. That constitutes the kind of environment in which even kind of conservatism has to operate. And clearly, neoliberal feminism is an iteration, a kind of intensification of liberal feminism. And historically, people, sort of socialist feminists, people who were sort of more radical kind of feminist agenda or political agenda, have had to kind of live with the fact that we've had to engage with the fact that the liberal feminism was very successful in establishing itself as kind of normative in many institutional contexts, that's constituted real gains of a certain kind, but it's also limited in some way. So my question is, are we at the limit of the progressive potential of liberal feminism, or is it still a resource that we can draw on or appeal to, with which to critique either liberal feminism, neoliberal feminism, or femo-nationalism? Because to me, I wonder. I think this thing with girls and boys is relevant, because to me that is partly a limit point of a certain kind of liberal feminism. Like you can tell girls that they can be liberal subjects, and you can appeal to boys to recognise girls as liberal subjects. But if you want to tell boys, okay, you have to have an imaginary which is partly about caring, it's partly about engaging, it's partly about recognising your own interdependence with other people and the vulnerability that produces, then maybe you go past a sort of liberal feminist limit. What do we think?
God, I hope we're not at the limit. I think that pointing out limitations of a particular version of feminism is my way of not being optimistic, but being hopeful. And I think...
I mean, liberal feminism, not all feminism, but as opposed to...
The limit, are we at our limit of liberal feminism?
As a progressive project.
Unless... I feel like we're at our limit. We're at a limit as a progressive project if it is not a critique of capitalism, and liberal feminism is not.
That's a yes.
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree. Sara just put it brilliantly in a sentence. I think we are definitely at the limit of liberal feminism, because I think liberal feminism for decades told women you need to go to work to be economically independent and to empower yourself through this type of economic emancipation. Not only that, but also you need to vote and participate in politics. And now lots of women go to work. The majority of women, women vote, but still, obviously work is shit, and wages are shit. And the political participation is not leading to changes. Political participation in terms of voting is not leading to the desired changes, etc. So I think, liberal feminism is showing its limits, which are, as Sara said, the limits of capitalism itself.
And on that bombshell. All right. Well, I think we're going to let that be the last word. I think. Thanks, everyone. Oh yeah, we're going to have announcements, about anti-unity. Sorry.
Yeah, Shuri normally does this, but she's not here. But thanks for coming, and if you have any announcements about anything that you're organising that's kind of like, I don't know, in line with what we're doing tonight. And for instance, we have Anti-University Festival that's happening in a couple of weeks. And there's loads of really exciting events that are going to take place. I think it starts on the 15th of June to the 22nd. yeah, and if anyone else has any announcements or anything that they're organising.
Yeah. So you want to talk about gender and media count? Or not?
Yeah, there's a gender and media symposium at the LSE on Monday and Tuesday of next week, where Catherine Rodberg is presenting, Jack Bradich is presenting, Joe Littler is presenting, Alison Winch, Rosalind Gill is giving a keynote, Angela McRobbie is giving a keynote, and it's a 2-day symposium with a feminist walk around Holborn, which will be interesting. We have a tour guide. So anyway, if you are interested at all in that, I can give you information about it. It's Monday and Tuesday of next week. So, yeah.
Any others? No. I won't be. I'll be at home with the children. I don't get together there. Okay. Okay. Next week we've got Natalie Fenton and Tom Mills talking about people power versus media power. Thanks very much, Ridley Road Market Bar, Anti University, Debbie, everyone. Thanks, and thanks again to Sara and Sara.
I'm sorry.
I can do media. I know you can. You can do everything. So it's my comment to say.
Of course. But I was thinking about the number of times that consumers and consumerism.
Yeah, right. Why didn't you say something?
I didn't know where to start. But I was thinking, actually, what I would do then, is just kiss the panel on and then people like actually explain what is being consumed. Not exactly that straightforward. Because we discussed this, we have discussed this before. For example, with David Brainerd.